Good afternoon. Today we'll be discussing the book Leadership Through Mentoring, the key to improving the confidence and skill of principals. I would like to introduce our authors. Phyllis Gimbel is Professor of Secondary Education and Educational Leadership at Bridgewater State University and an alumna of HGSE. She's also the author of several books on school leadership in various publications. Peter Gao has been a teacher, author, and consultant concerned primarily with independent schools. He is currently exploring yet another attempt at retirement. Before we begin, I would like to remind you to enter your questions into the Q&A feature, which will be active throughout the event. Phyllis, you can take it from here.
Thank you. All right. I will wait for slide one. Here. Okay. So, why this book? Why now? It's personal. It is kind of personal. My story, nowadays stories are so important. They seem to impact people more than just hearing facts, because people can hang their hats onto something that's more emotional, especially since this pandemic, when we've all become more empathic, hopefully, and more caring, hopefully. So my story basically is that I was a school principal and I never had a mentor. And now that I look back on it, I really feel that had I had a mentor, I could have impacted student achievement earlier, built relationships with teachers, promoted a school culture that was more cohesive earlier in my tenure. Another thing is I wanted someone with whom I could share my challenges and successes, get some advice and suggestions, someone who was not part of the school and who had perhaps gone through the principalship or school leadership prior. We wrote this book thinking that principals are in the complaint window. We've got to start to think about how we're going to lighten their load, because the teachers are complaining about all that's going on in our schools. Peter?
Well, like Phyllis, I found myself in an administrative role. I was never a school principal, confession, but I was suddenly an administrator in a newly created position in a school. I knew what I was supposed to do, but I had no modeling or really very much sort of professional support in how to do it. And I know, as Phyllis just said, I would have done a lot better job for my colleagues and my students had I been given some kind of mentoring. Then later, I found myself doing a lot of writing, and, well, first setting up new teacher programs in the school where I worked, and we tried to create something that was pretty elaborate, and then working with other schools and then writing and presenting on this topic. And one of the things that I discovered kind of dismayingly was that great mentoring programs, great teacher mentoring programs require a lot of energy and time, and I think a lot of schools were reluctant to commit all of what they needed to doing it well. The question was, and that's one of the things that was exciting about getting involved in this project and working with Phyllis, is what it is, and what are the competencies, what are the dispositions that will make a mentoring program, whether it's for teachers or principals, a success. And then how do we convince schools to put together the resources that are going to make these kinds of programs a success? And I know Phyllis and I both want to give a shout out to Samson Goldstein, whose role Phyllis can address.
Well, thank you for mentioning Samson, and he may indeed be a participant. He is a teacher in Taunton, Massachusetts, a special ed teacher. Samson is one of the finest graduate research assistants I've had. He put this book together so beautifully for us. He did the index, he did our references, he did our citations. And without Samson, we probably would not have been able to put this book together so quickly. We want to thank him for everything that he did for us and with us. He was also an absolute pleasure to work with. And it was during COVID. So oftentimes I would have to be in a parking lot and not at the, most of the time, not at the university because it was closed. But he was there right on time. So thank you, Samson.
Thank you, Samson. Well, I get to deliver some of the harder news here. This is urgent. And Phyllis spoke a little bit about why it's urgent these days, but we are in a time of challenges, and we know that nothing is going to sort of return to some kind of, sweet normalcy, because one, sweet normalcy never really existed, and two, there are lots of things that are going on now. The ground is shifting under our feet constantly. We all have read about, and many of us know, school leaders who have been under threats, including death threats, in the last couple of years for a variety of reasons. We know that our students are stressed and that their teachers are stressed and their families. Mental health issues are through the roof. Just pick up any newspaper. School violence is on the rise, and the Great Resignation, whether it's really happening or just kind of happening, is upon us. And then there are a lot of non-educational challenges for school leaders. And this is one of the things that our mentors, and you can read about this in the book, the mentors have noted as sometimes coming as a surprise to new principals. And currently we think about supply chain issues, staffing levels and availability, substitute teachers, school safety and security, transportation issues. And leaders in schools are being called upon to deal with all of this stuff. And they need all of the guidance that we can find for them. And that's why this seemed like a project that was so important, especially right in this moment. Well, and Phyllis mentioned the complaint window aspect of school leadership these days. It's always been lonely at the top. Ask any school principal or organizational head. But there are times when the work feels very, very lonely. And if you don't have peers, whether it's an informal network of friends or family or whatever upon whom to call, it's lonelier still. And, this is sort of a, list of the issues in the last one as well. But educational leadership programs, academic educational leadership programs are terrific. And they are going to be even more terrific as time goes on. They're comprehensive, but ultimately, when you're sitting in that big chair for the first time, it's, reading about how to do this stuff is to, it's like reading about how to put on a pair of shoes and walk in them. But that's not quite the same as putting upon those shoes and walking with them from meeting to meeting, taking, trips around the building, answering phone calls on the fly. And having a mentor can add to the confidence, the sense of not being alone, and add spring to anyone's step, no matter what kinds of shoes they find themselves walking in. So that's, again, why this book seemed so important in this moment. Come on. And so, owls. And again, more on why we think this is important. One of the things that I've been noticing as I watch the news is that when mainstream media addresses the challenges facing education right now, and they tend to focus on learning loss and all of this other things, they invariably lead with stories of kids and teachers, and they should, because school is for kids, and the degree to which these people are suffering in their roles and in their lives as we come out of what we hope is the worst of the pandemic. Oftentimes then, the reporter then shoves a microphone under the chin of a principal, sometimes a superintendent. And they all have this question, what are you going to do about this? As if there is some simple solution, and of course the people in charge know exactly what that magic solution is, and why aren't they doing it? Just adds again to the pressure that not only school leaders are under, but that schools and the educational enterprise are under right now. And occasionally you'll read about the possibility that the pool of people who want to become school principals, school leaders, is shrinking fast. And it's not hard to imagine why that might be, considering the way the world does this. So, wise owls. We all need wise owls in our lives to offer us perspective, to offer us the opportunities to reflect and figure out how to make things better. And mentoring is certainly the first step in bringing more wise owls online for more educational leaders. So over to Phyllis.
That brings me to talking a little about current background. Peter mentioned principal and senior administrator attrition nearing a crisis. Well, we wrote this book, and then an article appeared 6 months after the publication of our book. And I am going to read 3 sentences from this article. It's written on February 8th, 2022, just so recently. District Administration Online by a gentleman named Matt Zelaznik. And it's about a RAND study, so pertinent to principal attrition. We wrote the book, you see, knowing that turnover was high, and we thought the book would serve as a guide to the importance of mentoring, as well explaining the importance of mentoring and how to mentor. It's supposed to be also a guide. But this is what district administration has to say about the situation of turnover. And I quote here, the number of high school principals who have considered leaving their jobs has skyrocketed during the pandemic as new responsibilities have piled up and controversies have erupted over mask mandates, critical race theory, and other issues. More than a quarter of principals reported constant job-related stress, according to the latest report from the RAND Corporation. Now, this study by the RAND Corporation suggested that to ease the stress on principals, and I quote, is to support their well-being and their mental health by having district leaders gather data on the specific stressors and implement culturally responsive mentorship, especially for novice principals. The second bullet point on this slide says that stable, consistent building leadership has a positive effect on teacher efficacy and student learning. And that is common sense. If you keep having teacher turnover and principal turnover, you're constantly rebuilding and rebuilding, and there's no stability. We need to realize, all of us, that research has shown that the second most important impact on student learning after teachers is the principal, the school leader. Principal mentoring programs in Massachusetts and Vermont are working. They've been working for a while. And the reason we refer to these two is I happen personally to have been involved with both of them, doing some studies in Vermont and then in Massachusetts, serving as a facilitator and trainer for mentors for a few years prior to COVID. And so successful principals must find their best paths to stability and efficacy in the actual schools they're in. That's in their own schools, and certainly guidance will help them. Waiting for my next slide. Aha. Peter. Oh, that's me. That is not Peter. Regardless of title or school sector, school leaders need support and a sense of not being alone. That is so important because it does not take long for new school leaders to be overwhelmed by everything coming at them at the same time. They're overwhelmed because at the same time, they are trying to establish themselves and build their leadership team and trying to learn on the job. Yes, they've attended programs for aspiring school leaders. I myself teach in such a program. But as Peter pointed out, putting on the shoes and walking in them is slightly different than just learning, even with a practicum or an internship, because each school is different. The composition of the school varies. Who are the teachers? Who are the parents? What is the community like? What about the staff? So all school leaders have this issue. School administration is about adaptive expertise, turning basic skills into effective situational action. In fact, the ASCD Educational Leadership publication about a month or so ago came out with an entire issue devoted to the adaptive leader. So these roles of administrators are becoming more and more pertinent in this crucial time. Peter, I think you wanted to say a little something about the last bullet point.
Sure. Well, in the independent school world in which I've lived and worked, there are multiple professional organizations to support people in particular school functions and roles. And many of these offer very specific professional development opportunities to support people who are especially new in particular roles. And I'm just going to say this is a little bit of a plug here. Lately, I've had the honor of being involved in the establishment of such an organization for academic administrators, which there has not been in the independent school world, and others involved with overseeing teaching and learning in schools. It's called the Organization for Academic Leaders. You can find it at academicleaders.org. However, inspired by my work on this book, one of the things that we did, and I have some wonderful colleagues that really have been taking the lead on this, and even more than I did, was a lot of work on those competencies and dispositions that make school leaders, whatever their roles may be, effective, confident, and happy in their work. And one of the things that we're going to be talking a lot about is mentoring as we build out our professional development programs in academicleaders.org. But it's just exciting because we all know what mentoring could offer, and it's fun to consider what can happen going forward. So back to Phyllis here.
Thank you. So what is mentoring that we're talking about here? It's not something that can be defined absolutely perfectly. We know that it's general and situational guidance provided on a personal level by someone who has experienced similar situations in a similar position or role. That would be kind of a generic description, and it is exactly that. But mentoring involves the mentor supporting the mentee or the protege to find his or her own styles and best approaches, being themselves, not clones of their mentors. And that is a challenge in mentor training, because when you've done something for a number of years and you feel quite capable of what you've done, you do want to impart what has worked well for you, but you are not the person that you're mentoring. That person has different skills, attributes, shortcomings. So that has to be taken into effect in the mentoring process. Another thing is regular systematic contact, but also available in the moment. Well, that is really important. When I was in the Vermont study, I interviewed several mentors and mentees, and one of the mentees told me, "Oh dear, my mentor lives very far away." So I said to this person, "Well, how you seem to praise her. How is that possible if she lives so far away, your mentor?" And the principal said to me, don't you realize that she is available for me at 24 hours a day? I said, she is? Yes, by telephone. When I am driving home and I have a 55-minute commute here in the rural area in the snow, I can phone her at any time, and my mentor will answer the phone and help me as I drive carefully with my Bluetooth on with the suggestions and the advice of the moment. Different from coaching, it is. It's a little bit more relational, but very much in the same domain. It's more asking questions without judging and listening. I wait for my next slide. So, the good mentor. The main thing I think about a good mentor, based on the experiences I've had with the Massachusetts and the Vermont programs, is a good mentor really knows how to navigate challenges and successes, because praise is important. It keeps people going on, it gives them hope. It's the same thing when you offer feedback. I know when I grade student graduate papers, I don't know if the paper is not really up to par, I want to offer something that's hopeful, something the student has done that's well, that's good, that deserves a little bit of praise, so as not to discourage. So navigating challenges and successes is so important. Another thing about a mentor is that mentor has to know how to build relationships with teachers and staff and help the new school leader to do that. The mentor has to have a growth mindset for themselves and their colleagues, has to be pretty darn good at what they did, and self-aware. And you might say to yourself, why self-aware? Well, I think it was in 1998, a gentleman named Daniel Goldman, Goleman, Goldman, from the Harvard Business School. He wrote about emotional intelligence, known as EQ, an extremely important leadership component, especially as we navigate through this pandemic and afterwards, and all that's going on in the world. Self-awareness means being able to know your strengths, your weaknesses. Where can you improve, or can you mitigate your shortcomings, perhaps by building a team with people who have different strengths, and how do you go about doing it? So the mentor himself, herself, whatever, needs to be self-aware. Another thing a good mentor has to do is have a disposition to listen deeply, reflect, and support. And that is not easy. That is a challenge, listening deeply, reflecting, and supporting. And if it's boring, got to listen through it. And the good mentor believes in and is willing to make a personal investment in the success of each mentee. Again, that is not easy to do. It's time consuming, and it's something that you think about. A good mentor might be at a function with a family function or something, and all of a sudden get a phone call from the mentee. Well, that mentor, if he or she has made a personal investment in the success of the mentee, has to take the phone call and try to help through the situation. I think Peter's on now.
Well, we spoke earlier about adaptive expertise and adaptive leadership, and this is a favorite topic of one of my colleagues in the Academic Leader Organization, and I've learned a lot from just being around her. And it's this kind of simple and beautiful idea that as we develop competency, we also build our capacity to apply what we have learned in brand new situations. And obviously, this is an important concept in mentoring, because the reality is that few mentors have actually experienced what new school leaders are facing in 2022. These situations, the litany we provided earlier, are brand new in a lot of situations. But successful leaders in mentorship roles have faced challenges and situations that are likely to be analogous in importance, maybe, and even in the scale, the degree to which they affect the entire community. And they know, because of training and disposition, we'll talk about training in a bit, how to work with a mentee to frame these challenges in ways that make these challenges more manageable. And yeah, even if they have not faced and resolved every issue that may face their mentee, by working to know their mentees and their mentees' school. And this is, again, where it's in all of those dispositions about, listening and believing in the success of every mentee. And they've been selected and trained to know themselves, because part of the training is reflection on their own experiences. And more on this in slides that are coming up. Mentor can work together with a mentee to define what's happening and what's at stake, and then to imagine the paths forward, and how then to debrief on this situation, the aftermath. Probably debriefing would have been a better word there, but the idea of understanding the school, its community, what strategies are likely to be most effective, how to look at what could happen things, those potential repercussions, and how to minimize and contain those, or maybe how to build on them if they turned out to be good things. So all of these are part of this challenge of adaptive expertise. But it's something that if you've done something for a while and feel confident that you can do it, you probably have found yourself using those same skills, those same perspectives to do other things well, or at least to try to do other things well. So it's a wonderful idea. And a little bit more on the mentoring and coaching thing. Obviously, there's no sort of perfect Venn diagram that explains what's coaching and what's mentoring, but they are absolutely critical resources in leadership development, and they are certainly complementary and not mutually exclusive by any stretch of the imagination. Coaching tends to be, I think, more specifically related to personal qualities, and the part of the question is, who is the sort of who's the client, if you will. And both the coach and the mentor need to be working first and foremost for the person they're coaching or mentoring. And somebody's probably paying for that. We'll talk about that a little bit, perhaps. But think about mentoring as being about building the capacity to engage confidently and successfully with varieties of situations that may arise in a school leader's working life. It's not about how they dress before presenting the report to the school board. It's about how to deal with and how to think about what the school board may have to say about the new reading program that's being instituted, or whatever it may be. And one of the issues that comes up in this, and this is one of the things that makes mentoring really important, and I think unique and uniquely distinct from coaching, is that one of the challenges that our mentors have reported in working with new principals is the new principals find that maintaining that balance between their working lives and their lives as human beings and family members and friends can be a little challenging. This is an area where mentors have done this, and if they don't have specific guidance or advice to offer, do this, do this, do this, we don't want them to be doing that so much. What they do have is experience in developing that perspective in their own lives and figuring out how to build that work-life balance, and help their mentees find themselves more fulfilled, not just as school leaders, but as people and family members. So that's a big thing. It's a really big thing. But again, it's about situational support and how you build from that situational support and to build general capacities, general competencies and dispositions. So that's where we are on the differences there. How do you do this? Phyllis.
So mentor selection, matching, and training, not easy, especially if the supply of mentors is not high. So here's what we have. Since the book talks a bit about the two initiatives, the Massachusetts initiative and the Vermont initiative, we are, shall we say, using those as types of mentoring programs. And what they try to do, both of them, is seek out retired or retiring principals who are experienced, at least 3 to 5 years minimal experience, if not more. And then trying hard to screen for empathy, which is not the easiest thing to do, but looking for active listening dispositions. Trying to match for similar school types and strategic priorities, again, not an easy thing to do. Establishing training protocols, both Vermont and Massachusetts have more than 1 day training programs. In Massachusetts, we had 2, and some programs have 3-day training programs, 2 or 3 day training programs. This may evolve into something different nowadays. I will get to that in a few moments. And then Peter keeps alluding to money, having to mention compensation. It has come to pass that there were federal funds and state funds for principals to have professional development. The problem is sometimes superintendents do not always use those funds for mentoring. However, that is now changing, which I will get to in another slide. But there is usually some compensation for the mentor. You can move to the next slide, Peter, please.
I believe I can. There we are.
There we are. So mentor training, lessons from the field, key topics. Well, what this means is as follows. The Massachusetts program, since I was involved in it until just before COVID, we debriefed with the mentors after 1.5 years of their mentoring. In Vermont, there was a survey that was done at the time that I was doing the study. And that was a number of years ago, maybe 2016 or 17 or 18. And so here are some of the topics that seem to be the same in both programs, in the training, that is. The principal's role in the current educational landscape, utmost importance, because the main thing is to turn good intentions into effective actions. Good intentions into effective actions. The mentor competencies, those really include being able to have a spirit of inquiry without judgment. That is not easy. Promoting a spirit of inquiry without judgment. Not at all easy. And listening and asking questions. Teaching about norms of collaboration, because the mentor has to collaborate and teach, or shall we say, offer suggestions or advice to the new school leader on collaboration. And that, again, requires a spirit of inquiry and learning how to probe, pause, and listen, and throw some new ideas on the table. Probe, pause, listen, and throw some ideas on the table, as well as paraphrase. Resources for mentors are important in the training program, and usually they revolve around how to offer feedback, which is becoming more and more important these days. I believe a woman named Therese Houston has recently, in the past 2 weeks, published an article online and perhaps in print as well about offering feedback and how precarious that situation is, because you have to balance it with some praise, as we spoke before. And listening, learning how to listen without getting distracted and without interjecting your own ideas while the person is talking. Entry planning for the new principal is important. I know in Massachusetts, they tried very hard to have the mentor meet with the mentee the summer prior to the school year so that they can become acquainted with one another, see how the match is going to go. Are they going to be a good match? And get the ground rules for their relationship established. And then principal evaluation. The mentor does not evaluate it at all. Mentoring does not involve evaluation. What the mentor does is try to help the mentee develop goals so that when that principal has to be evaluated, the goals, some of them which at least have been in effect and have been achieved. And that is a very important thing. Even in the summer before, the new principal can start to think about what's important in that district. Sometimes when someone gets hired, the superintendent or the committee mentions in their, I guess you would say, in their talks, what the important things are that they would like the new leader to do. So that's important. All right, next slide. More mentorship. Now, this is again gathered information from the mentors, what they told myself and some other folks here in Massachusetts, and also I gathered this from Vermont, what the topics are that mentors need to be talking about. Getting to know in big letters the community, staff, students, families, very important for the new school leader. Building positive relationship with the superintendent's office. Oh yes. Understanding district cultures and priorities. That's important because the new leader needs to establish goals. And here comes a very big one. So big that I am going to grab this booklet that I just downloaded a week ago, right here. You can't read it. What it is a mentor supplement published by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education just this year, a few months ago. Mentor Supplement, Principal and Induction Mentoring Handbook. Okay, and notice the bullet point says leading for equity in diverse and diversifying communities, and that is every community. Well, in this booklet published by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, available online at their website, Module 1, Leading for Equity, Professional and Inclusive Culture. Module 2, Leading for Equity, Instructional Leadership. Tools, Equity Lens Focus, Interrogate, Reflect, Act. Empathy Interview Protocol, Equity Pause Protocol, Equity Learning Walk Protocol, Equity Lens Focus, Equity Pause Protocol, Continuous Learning Plan. But bibliography, this now resources, bibliography of research supporting the anti-racist leadership competencies, sources supporting the anti-racist leadership competencies. In this booklet published by the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed. So things have changed since this book was published. This just appeared a couple months ago. Very important equity. And I know at Bridgewater State University, where I teach grad students, we are phasing in equity competencies for our aspiring school leaders. Building relationships with families and community organizations, leading program initiatives in multiple areas, and anticipating and dealing with pushback. Boy, is that a topic. Having difficult conversations and building functional relationships with employee unions. Another source that's very important to talk about. Peter?
Well, the other thing, and again, I keep finding myself with the dire ones here, but it's important to understand how the harder the situation, the more important, the more key that mentor-mentee relationship is. And that has to be built on mutual trust, because the mentor has to be able to talk about what they're facing, what they're feeling. I mean, sorry, the mentee has to talk about what they're feeling, what they're facing, what's going on in their world, to give the mentor as full a picture as possible so that the mentor can dig deep into their own experiences and their own thoughts and feelings to discover what might be helpful to their mentee. And again, these not just professional but personal issues as well. How, what happens if your personal life is in some kind of a crisis and you're trying to lead a school in your first year? But that idea of quality and candor is important. And Phyllis mentioned this a little bit, but there are three things in particular that the mentor does not do and should not ever be asked to do. One of these is to have any kind of role in the formal evaluation of the mentee. Just no.
Right.
The second, be asked for commentary or to make reports on the mentee, not just, we met on these days, but commentary or reports on the mentee given to any of the mentee's supervisors or managers. This just would blow the confidential and trustful mentor-mentee relationship to pieces. And of course, the mentor must never, and certainly never, be asked to make judgments or offer critical commentary on the mentee as a person or as a leader in any situation outside the privacy of the mentor-mentee relationship in their quiet room together or in their phone call or Zoom or whatever it might be. That confidentiality, that is just so important, unbelievably important, and we can't overstate how important that is.
So we have a few more slides, but I am watching the time. I have 1:45. We do want to end at 1, but I would like people to be able to ask questions, and Meanne will be in charge of the Q&A. So given that time frame, I just will give you some overview. Some of the lessons from the Vermont Principals Association survey, and mind you, it was an electronic survey, and it wasn't every single mentor who answered. I don't remember the exact percentage, and it was a number of years ago. And the survey pointed to the following things: that the novice principals were quite satisfied with their mentor relationships, and the mentors felt the same. And this is important, we've mentioned this: the more frequent and regular the meetings, the greater the level of satisfaction, because that was a question on the survey. And that makes sense, because if you don't meet fairly often, just think of what can build up in between and how you have to kind of start all over and narrate what happened. Whereas if you keep up with the relationship more ongoing, your satisfaction level would be higher. And the new leaders felt that the mentors did have a significant impact positively on their job performance in the first 2 years. Okay, our next slide. Massachusetts, findings, best practices from the Mass School Administrators Association. Well, we met with our mentors at the MSAA just before COVID, in the middle of the year. It was January, just 2 months prior to COVID. And these are the things that kind of came out, our lessons from the Mass Association mentoring program. And I would like to mention a couple things about that program before I read these bullets. And that is, that program is now evolving since the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed is now promoting mentoring, and they want mentoring for school leaders. Massachusetts School Administrators Association is working hard to find an organization. Currently, they're interviewing to train mentors, and they're looking more and more for mentors, which is one of the bullet points. So I'll go on now with the bullet points. What's important is careful matching of mentor-mentee. That is important. Also, they said that the mentor said superintendents need to be brought up to speed on the mentoring process. Not all superintendents are. Their engagement in goal setting is a plus. Time for reflection, very important, including written reflection. And here we go. The pool of potential mentors here in Massachusetts is variable in size by region. Mentor recruitment will be more important down the road because now it's the Mass Department really kind of mandates it. And we have noticed in the western part of our state of Massachusetts, it's very challenging to find mentors. Year-end summary reports are submitted to the Mass School Administrators Association, as in some other programs. There are other state programs besides these two that I've discussed. But these are the two we're most familiar with and that are in the book. We can go to the next slide. We are going to have time for questions. So what's next? Aha. Well, this is an issue. We need more qualitative and quantitative research to find out how successful, what is needed in these mentor programs. Is principal retention and attrition shrinking with those new school leaders who have had mentors and had successful mentoring relationships? Is principal stress diminishing? Is there less anxiety? Is the confidence level of new school leaders improving as a result of these mentoring relationships? We don't have all this data. We need it. Long-term programmatic academic impacts of principal mentorship, really, we need that too. Our schools where the new leaders have had mentors, is their academic performance, has it improved? And can that be attributed to the mentoring relationship? Can we really find indicators and measure this? We need to know all that before we continue down the line with all that we're doing, especially here in Massachusetts that I've kept up with on mentoring. So now, what other mentorship programs for school leaders and roles other than principal head of school? I know that in 2011 or to 2015 in Vermont, if I recollect correctly, the ed tech leaders also had mentors. And when you think about it, many of the mentors in Massachusetts told me that their new principals, their brand new principals, whom they were mentoring, often had to serve as mentors to new school assistant principals, yet they themselves were being mentored, and yet they weren't trained to be mentors, and they had to mentor the assistant principal if indeed the assistant principal was a new assistant principal. And if the assistant principal was not a new assistant principal, that also posed a challenge to the new principal who had to reach out to the mentor on how to get along and build a team with the assistant principal who'd been there for several years. I actually had that situation happen to me when I got a job as a principal. The assistant principal was also a candidate for principal and did not get the job. I did. And it took me, to be quite honest, a year and a half to build a solid working relationship with that person, to acknowledge that person's strengths and to work together with that person to build a good academic support system. I think Peter wants to chime in now and talk about other things with mentorship. Peter?
Well, just this idea of a culture of mentorship, cultures of mentorship. I had an old friend who did a lot of professional development work for many, many schools in the independent school community. And he used to urge everyone in every leadership position to think of themselves as a furtherer, that was his word, of furthering other people's careers and their lives of joy. And it's a pretty great ambition. And the other day I was on a webinar with people from Making Caring Common at Harvard, some Challenge Success and a couple of similar organizations. And they spoke of the key to building those furthering relationships as being, one, curiosity about the other person, asking and listening, and two, active empathy with their lives. And I think curiosity and empathy lie at the heart of great mentoring. And Phyllis and her colleagues can keep researching that. So I think it's time for us to move on to questions. We have a few minutes left.
Meanne, you're in charge and you've got 7 minutes or
Yes.
6.
So folks are welcome to drop their questions into the Q&A feature below, and we'll get started right away. Right, the first question is, where does the impetus to establishing a principal or leader mentorship program comes from? And how might people listening begin if they would like to see something similar happen in their state or association? What are some first steps?
Ooh. Should I tackle that, or Peter, do you want to tackle it?
I think, Phyllis, you're the
All right.
you've had the state expertise.
Okay. Well, that is a good question. I think I understand the question. If the person is saying in the state of Massachusetts, then they could contact the Mass School Administrators Association and tell them, and they will try to find a mentor and try to talk to the super. Basically, let me change. The Mass School Administrators Association basically contacts superintendents in the summer prior to the academic year. What they do is they go online and they try to find out where are their brand new principals in the state of Massachusetts. After they find the school systems where there are new principals, then they try to contact the superintendent in order to establish mentoring programs. Does that answer the question, do you think, Meanne?
Yes, thank you. I have another person asking if whether slides and sites will be available to participants.
They're okay with me to share the slides, Peter?
I will send along the latest deck to Meanne and she can share.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next question is, in the established programs, what happens if a mentor-mentee relationship isn't working? What sort of things can make this happen and how is it addressed?
That is a good question. I'll start and then let Peter also chime in. That has occurred. It has occurred because sometimes prior to, and I'll speak again about Massachusetts, prior to this, shall we say, mandate in Massachusetts, with this new booklet that's been published and things of that sort, and Massachusetts clamping down on principal induction programs, what's happened is some superintendents have kind of grabbed a person in the same school district and made that person a mentor. And that has not always worked out because, number one, that person knows too much about everything. And so the mentee doesn't feel comfortable. So what happens in that case, to answer this question, is I have seen the mentee go to the superintendent and say, it isn't working, please get me another one. And so the question then would be, does that superintendent reach out to the Mass School Administrators Association and try to find another mentor? I do not know. So I'm not sure I really know that answer. Peter, you have anything?
My only thought is in school, teacher mentorship programs, we always try to essentially focus this as kind of a no-fault divorce situation. That if it's not working, it's not working. If you can find a new mentor, make notes on how your mentor training could be better for the next round, but really this ought not to be a situation that adds stress to anyone's life. Find a new mentor if that's possible and make every effort to do so.
Great, thank you. We probably have time for one last question. How do you encourage folks to pay it forward? What is the biggest incentive that people can be offered to give up their free time?
Oh my gosh, that is a stupendous question. However, now that I'm a little older, I'm going to speak because I have noticed that people who have been very successful in whatever their career is, not necessarily the principalship, who have an opportunity to share what they've enjoyed. Love, I have seriously noted, they love to impart to others what they have enjoyed and how they can make someone else enjoy it and learn about the aspects of whatever it is that their career was. So, and I have seen firsthand in Vermont and here in Massachusetts, the mentors that with whom I've interacted, they are also happy to share their, I'm going to say, expertise, their knowledge with someone else. They feel so comfortable about it. Peter, do you have anything further?
I think you've said it, and as a serially failed retiree, I can say that that's the feeling I have. If I can help someone, if I can further someone and honor my late friend David Mallory, then I am happy to do it. And I think this is mentoring offers a great path for paying it forward down through the educational world entirely.
Peter made me think of one last thing, and I am cognizant of the time, and that is, what a great honor to a mentor to see someone whom they have helped succeed.
Yes.
It's a great honor to see somebody you have mentored to succeed.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much for this really interesting conversation. And thank you everyone for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Indeed.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.